Okay, I'm going to do the same thing as what I did for 5A for 5B because you actually have everything that you need to know for 5B already because of chapter 4. So chapter 4, if you think about 5B, is just really good revision of chapter 4. So besides these first couple here, all the rest is straightforward. So it says sketch a graph of each of the following relations and state its domain and range. So this is a little bit different in the sense that they're points. So if you have a look, these are just all those points plotted. So there they are there. Sorry about my messy writing. So if we look at the domain of this function, we know the domain is your x values. So there's -6, -3, -1, and 1. So there's our x values. So that's actually our domain. Then we've got our range, -4. Oops, doesn't look like -4. -1, 5, and 7. So we've just looked at the x values for our domain, y values for our range. If we drop down to question C over here, so it's x squared plus y squared equals 4. So you know how to draw a circle. So there's our circle. So if we think about what our domain is our x values, so that goes from there to there. It includes those, so we put our little square brackets in. Our range is the same, so we put our square brackets in. This, D, this is a line, so we know if we drew that line, and we've got what we call a restricted domain. So this is for values that have x is greater than 0. So that means we've got to draw our graph. We can't go this side because otherwise it's negative. We want only positive values of x. So we quickly do our x-intercept, find our y and x-intercepts, draw our graph. So we've got our graph there, so now we've got to think about what our domain is. We've already got that because it's our positive values. What would be our range? So we're looking at our y values, which is up and down here. So you're looking at, it's going to be 6, and it's all these numbers less than 6. So it goes from negative infinity way down here up to 6. Okay, so can you see that? So this is our y values go from here all the way down to there because this will just keep going down and down and down. So that's heading towards negative infinity. And it includes 6, so we've got to do our square brackets. And that was obviously our domain is that way. So this one here, 1f that we had to do over here. So we've got our straight line, but once again, we've got a restricted domain. So we could go and find the x and y intercepts, but we'd be actually doing extra work that we don't need. So this is where we have to think smart. So I'm going to put in -4 and sub in 1 because they're the endpoints of the line. So if I sub those in, I get that. I've subbed those in, so actually make it a bit smaller. Screen, oops. So there's my graph. So I could have found what those intercepts were, but I only really need from here to here because I'm after my domain. So what's my in range? So my domain is going to be from here, which is -4, across to here, which is 1. So there's my domain. My x values only go between -4 and 1. My y is my range. So my range is only going between -5 and +5. So I've got my domain and range. There they are under there, and it included those points. So once again, if we go over here, question 2. So this is a little bit easier because we've actually got our graphs for us. So we've got to look at our domain and range. So they're pretty straightforward. You know that one. This one, if you have a think about it, our x values go from -infinity to infinity, and our y values go from -1 to infinity. Okay, so think about that. Obviously, our range is 4 to -infinity down there. This one's a little bit trickier, okay, because you've got to complete the square. So if I jump across here to question 3, so that over to this side a bit. So I've got my x squared plus 6x plus 10. So I want this part to be my completing the square. I get that. So I ended up with this by completing the square. I put that in green because this is the parts that we're adding on, remember, and then taking away. So we haven't changed our equation, but by doing this part here, it's allowed me to get a perfect square there. Now it's in turning point form, so I can quickly sketch my graph. Then I can put my domain and range in. So if we think about what our domain is, all our x values, so that's going all the way that way. So my x values will go that way. So it's going to be over the real number plane or negative infinity to infinity. So what is my range? My range is going to be from 1 all the way up. So it includes 1. Once again, completing the square. So I'm not going to show you the solutions to that one. We've got sketching graphs. Question 4, did we have to do 4? Yep. So we're sketching graphs again. We've got our domain here because it's restricted. So let's look at subbing in x equals 2. We probably need one other point as well just to define the graph so we can find our domain. So the hardest part with these is really just sketching the graph, but they're pretty straightforward. And once again, restricted domain, so we can put in that value so we know it's there. And then our infinity, so we find another point. So just our domain and range. Now you can use a CAS calculator to help you with these if you want to, but they're pretty straightforward. So we've got another parabola, once again restricted domain. So it's easy. We need to find our turning point, put those in, we get our domain and range. Probably don't need to go down to some trickier ones over here. Circles. Where's our? Here we go. This is what I want. So half circles, that should be straightforward. So these ones here, all right, so we've got our hyperbolas, which from chapter 4 you should be able to sketch. So there's my sketch. I've got my asymptotes in there, okay? So now what's my domain going to be? If you think about it, my x values go all the way this way, all the way that way, but it can't equal this. So it's going to be all the real values, so from all, real values, positives and negative, but it's got to exclude 5 over 2. Remember, it gets really, really close to it, but can never touch. So thinking about that, what about our y? So our y can go all the way up there, can go all the way down there. So it's pretty much everything except this y equals 3 because that's an asymptote. So we've got to exclude that. So that's probably our trickiest one. We know that we've got basically all x values except this, all y values except that. How do we write it down? Real number plane excluding, and there's our asymptotes. We've got to sketch this. Okay, domain's pretty straightforward. Oh, I've missed my little line there, so I have to draw that in later. Okay, once again, we've got an asymptote, so think about how that's going to affect it. So we might have to do something similar up here with an exclusion. And I think that should set you up ready to do these ones. Okay, cheers.